I am in the North American landscape against the deciduous woods of North America. And today I'm going to take you to a totally different place, 8,000 miles away in New Zealand. I'm a Longwood Fellow, my name's Barbara Wheeler, and join me on a trip down under to the South Pacific island of New Zealand. Well, firstly, I want to take you through a little bit of a reference point as to where New Zealand is on the world map. And here we can see New Zealand nestled way down there for people who may not be sure of the location. It sits at latitudes 40 to 47 degrees south and is nestled between Antarctica to the south and Australia to the west. As one travels around New Zealand, the vegetation types change, often very dramatically within the space of just a few hours. New Zealand is really narrow when you compare it with North America. For example, you can move from the city of Christchurch here on the east coast of the South Island. You're on the beach, you're on the coast. You travel through the high altitude tussock lands with huge limestone rock formations, then through to alpine habitats, then down through the alpine habitats to the rainforest and then the coast, and you'll end up here around the Hokitika to Greymouth area, and that will only take you 3 hours to get through by car. And climate zones are really varied, so let me take you through some of those now. Starting with the northern North Island, the winterless north, subtropical, and is characterized by warm, humid summers and mild winters. The coast, the beaches are never far from you. This is a really narrow portion of New Zealand. To the central North Island, a really wide range of temperatures, warm, dry summers, cool winters. Here, the image you can see the tussock lands of the central North Island. These wonderful hues of colour that you get en masse of tussock grass. Wonderful in the shifting light during the day. And to the eastern coast of the North Island. This is a really wonderful coastline, characterised by dry, sunny and hot summers, mild winters. It's surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, which in contrast to the western coast is really calm in comparison. Onto the west coast of the North Island, characterised by warm summers, mild winters and lots of wind straight off the Tasman Sea, and it really does shape the way the land looks. Classic image here of how wind shapes the vegetation on this southwest coast of the North Island. Further up the coast is Mount Taranaki. It's a dormant volcano, still considered active, and it last erupted in 1854. Volcanoes form part of the landscape through the middle to the upper part of the North Island and offshore, with 12 active volcanoes in those areas. Okay, so we're going to skip across Cook Strait now and head to the South Island. We're at the northern part of the South Island, the sunshine capital of New Zealand, where the summers are warm and dry and the winters are relatively mild. It does get below freezing during the winter time, however the day temperatures are always mild. This region has some of the highest sunshine hours in New Zealand. The northwest coast is very exposed to the elements, and you can see here how the vegetation again is shaped by those winds. Wonderful mountain ranges in this part of New Zealand. Here, the tussock land that's interspersed with these beautiful silver grey dots which are one of our Salmisia species, one of the daisies. And to the eastern South Island, where there are very warm summers, often with hot, dry, northeasterly winds, very, very low rainfall, and winters are really quite cold and frosty. The Pacific Ocean on the eastern coast, as you can see here, is much, much calmer than that of the west coast. And to the southern South Island, coastal, affected by prevailing winds that come from the south and the southwest, and they very much have a cooling effect on temperatures. Mild to cool summers and cold winters. This photo here is of Dunedin City, the Otago Peninsula. It has volcanic origins, but these volcanoes are very much long extinct. Beautiful, beautiful coastlines shaped by those prevailing winds. And New Zealand beach forests that sprawl across the land to the sea, to those sandy, sandy beaches. And a temperate cloud forest, which is just a very short 10-minute drive north of my hometown, Dunedin City. You can see the main highway cutting through the lower third of the photo. Really accessible area, and it's got a whole host of wonderful trekking tracks right through that cloud forest. Then to inland South Island, very low rainfall, incredibly low, hot, dry summers, very, very cold winters with severe frosts. And in all these images, you can see tussock lands dominate. It's a wonderful, wonderful part of the country. And then at the opposite extreme, to the west coast of the South Island, extremely high rainfall, over 5 feet per year. Mild summers, mild winters, waterfalls abound. Tea-coloured lakes, coloured from the tannins that wash from the surrounding forests. Wetlands. And, of course, the majestic fjords of Fiordland. We're going to leap across to the third island, main island of New Zealand, Rakiura, Stewart Island, across Thovo Strait. High rainfall, warm to mild temperatures year-round. The weather is really changeable and unpredictable, with weather sometimes changing quickly, multiple times a day. Sits at 47 degrees south, and there's not a lot of land between Rakiura, Stewart Island and Antarctica. It really does live the 4 seasons in one day. As well as the 3 main islands, New Zealand has over 700 offshore islands. Many are uninhabited. Some are island sanctuaries for the conservation of endangered species, like this one, Anchor Island, nestled in the southwest of the South Island in Dusky Sound. Rangitoto Island is in the North Island off the coast of Auckland. It's volcanic and forms an iconic and prominent site from most places around Auckland City. Here you can see the cone shape of Rangitoto Island from the island sanctuary of Turituri Matangi Island. New Zealand has evolved in isolation for 65 million years, at which time it split completely from the supercontinent Gondwana. The uniqueness of the flora and the fauna is down to this evolutionary period, as species adapted in isolation on the islands of New Zealand. I want to take you through some of the unique wildlife that we have on the islands of New Zealand, starting with this crazy parrot, kakapo. It's a flightless parrot, It's a big parrot, and there's only 210 birds left in the world. They're all on offshore island sanctuaries around New Zealand. The takahe, 418 birds left. Both the kakapo and the takahe have had extensive efforts from the New Zealand government and the Department of Conservation to fund species survival. And they've had a lot of success with this. On to another parrot, this time an alpine parrot, Kia. And here they're on top of my car. I'm parked at the entrance of Homer Tunnel, at the entrance to Milford Sound. I've been on a walk. I've been up to see Mount Cook lilies flowering, and I've come back and these two Kia I spied on my car. And what they do is they're very curious, and they like to sort of get into things, and they're trying to work out how to pull the rubber seal off the sunroof on top of my car. They're really well known also for stealing shoelaces out of hiking boots. So one thing you learn when you're trekking the South Island mountain regions is to never leave your hiking boots unattended. Penguins, a really lovely animal. The yellow-eyed penguin here frequents the eastern and southern coasts of the South Island. We also have blue penguins, which are smaller than this one, and bigger than this one is the Fiordland crested penguin. The majestic northern royal albatross, a wingspan of an incredible 9 feet. The breeding colony for these huge seabirds is very accessible to Dunedin City on the east coast of the South Island. The colony is on Otago Peninsula, and it's just a short drive from the central city. There is nothing better in this world, I don't think, than looking upwards and seeing these majestic birds glide in flight above you. The diminutive but forever moving New Zealand fantail, common in our lowland forests, photographed here at Dunedin Botanic Garden. And also at the Botanic Garden in Dunedin, sitting in a magnolia tree, the huge kereru, the New Zealand wood pigeon. Very different from maybe rock pigeons that people do know. They're much smaller. The New Zealand wood pigeon is a huge bird, and look at that colouring. It's just beautiful. Let's get on to some plants. And I want to start with a little bit on some exotics. The Russell lupin. And many others like the Russell lupin, like Crocosmia montbretia. They've invaded the native landscape. In cases like the Russell lupin and the Crocosmia, they've actually become tourist attractions within themselves. People flock to Aeolian Mount Cook to see the Russell lupins in flower. However, they've altered the biodiversity of the land forever, and in this case the waterways, and you can see the purple hue of the Russell lupins through this waterway. But let's look at some New Zealand native landscapes, and I want to talk to you about some of the forests of New Zealand because they look markedly different to those here in North America. The North American forest is deciduous. The New Zealand forest is predominantly evergreen. Only 11 species of woody native plants lose their leaves over fall and winter. Before people arrived in New Zealand, 80% of New Zealand was covered in dense forest. It seems very green today, however just 24% of forest cover remains on the New Zealand landscape. The flora is really unique. 80% of New Zealand species' natural range is only New Zealand, nowhere else in the world. The plants are endemic to New Zealand. This can be really thrilling when you see them, but of course As a visitor to our country, it can be frustrating as you try to identify an entirely new range of plants. To give you some examples of the New Zealand forest, here is one on the west coast of the South Island. Nikau palms dominate this forest, and you can see the dense canopy beneath them. Further down the South Island, this forest area just inland of the east coast shows the density and the diversity within many native forests. Even further inland on the doorstep of Fiordland is an example of a beech forest. Lots and lots of moss and lots of ferns. 2/3 of New Zealand forests are New Zealand beech forests. They're very different from the American or the European beech in that New Zealand beech is evergreen. Beech forests have less species, hence as you can see in the image here, they're more open in appearance. I want to share with you now a snapshot of some of the plants of New Zealand along with their fascinating characteristics. And I want to start with some of the iconic New Zealand plants. Here we have the silver fern. That's perhaps the most well-known of our New Zealand native plants, as it's the emblem of many of our sports teams. It's a tree fern. There are about 10 species of tree ferns, and the silver fern reaches up to 32 feet in height, and it's the easiest of the tree ferns to identify, as you just turn the frond over and before you is this beautiful, beautiful white underside. The New Zealand cabbage tree, really distinctive in the New Zealand landscape. Gardeners love it for its architectural appearance and for the flowers, which are beautifully scented. However, when planted next to turf grass, it's one of the most disliked trees in New Zealand. The old leaves have a tendency to fall to the ground, and when they do, they get hidden in the grass, and as soon as you come near them with your strimmer or your lawnmower, these leaves will whip themselves around your blades, and they're really difficult to remove. So gardeners have a love-hate relationship with the New Zealand cabbage tree. New Zealand flax. Māori name for New Zealand flax is harakiki. There are 2 species of harakiki, and this one grows in the wetlands adjacent to rivers and along the coast, as you can see in this image. And here's a close-up of the flower. Bellbirds love getting into these flowers. They get a lovely supply of nectar from them. And the second species, the mountain flax. And these 2 species are really easy to tell apart because the previous one, harakiki, has upright leaves, upright flowers and upright seed heads. And here you can see the pendulous seed heads of the mountain flax, and the flowers and the leaves are also pendulous. New Zealand kowhai, a spectacular tree indeed in the New Zealand landscape, and perhaps known as the national flower of New Zealand. In its native habitat, it can be seen growing along the banks of rivers and streams, where the golden yellow branches arch over the water in spectacular fashion. This image here, taken at Dunedin Botanic Garden, you can see the hillside clothed in kowhai, flowering profusely. Depending on the species, they will flower from late winter into spring. Kakabeak, so named as the flowers are similar to the New Zealand kaka, one of New Zealand's native parrots. This wonderful shrub is rare in its native habitat, and in fact some sources believe it is down to the last single solitary plant in the wild. However, it's really common in garden. Here we can see a close-up of the flowers of kakabeak and also the white form. To see the New Zealand Mount Cook buttercup in its native habitat, you have to venture into the alpine areas of the South Island and Stewart Island. It grows in the wetter areas, and there's nothing better than hiking 3 to 4 hours to an alpine herb field, rounding a corner and seeing this plant en masse and in flower. Flowering in spring through summer, it is well worth the long hike uphill to see it. Rata are in the myrtle family and are spectacular when they're in bloom. The southern rata grows throughout New Zealand, and then there is a northern rata which grows in the North Island and at the top of the South Island. As you can see from the image here, these beautiful crimsony red flowers just are stunning. And in the image on the left, that's in the Arthur's Pass Valley, and you can see the sort of red crimson hue on those hillsides. That is the rata. Another plant that's in the myrtle family, Pohutakawa. It's also known as the New Zealand Christmas tree because it flowers at Christmas time. Its natural range is the north of the North Island, and as you can see from this image, its location next to sand, it's a coastal tree. It's grown in cultivation throughout New Zealand, but as you go into the cooler parts of the South Island, it will not flower till after Christmas. Common throughout New Zealand plants is heteroblasty, and it occurs in about 10% of our woody plants. Heteroblasty is a botanical term, and it means plants that have distinct foliage forms, and in the case of the Lancewood, it has a juvenile and an adult phase. The toothed Lancewood, as you can see here in the image on the left, has a very distinctive juvenile form. Look at those long, and the toothed Lancewood, very toothed leaves, that beautiful sort of browny red midrib that goes down the centre of the leaf. Really distinctive form. And then the image on the right shows a more young adult form, somewhere between juvenile and adult. That juvenile phase can last for 15 to 20 years. So why do they do this? Why do plants do this? It's still the cause of great debate. And there are a couple of theories. There's one where it's a response to avoid browsing from large flightless, now extinct birds, the moa. The largest species of moa grew to 12 feet tall. By the time the Lancewood got tall enough to be palatable, the moa would not be tall enough to reach it. Another theory is that it's a response to changing light levels as the plant grows and moves from the understory to higher up in the subcanopy of the forest. This tree, though, is a great addition to the landscape designer's plant palette. The upright and narrow growth, the funky architectural leaves and form of the juvenile phase make it a fantastic plant for using in small, narrow spaces in the home garden and around cities. And here are images of the Lancewood as it leaves the juvenile stage and enters the adult phase. And you can see that even as a young small tree, as it's starting to leaf into the more adult phase, it's still a very narrow, tall, upright tree, beautiful for the landscape. Another quirk of New Zealand flora is the divaricating plants. And they're plants that have a very much a wiry interlacing habit with branching at wide angles and often have small leaves. And plants will either keep this habit their entire lives or retain it solely in a juvenile phase. As you can see by this Muehlenbeckia, the leaves are held within the branches and are really small, and it's thought to be protection either from browsing herbivores or climatic extremes. The flowers are really tiny on this Muehlenbeckia, and it's in full flower now. You can see the beautiful tiny little creamy white flowers there. But this Muehlenbeckia is more of a distinctive foliage plant planted for foliage more than flowering. And you can prune it to shape, you can topiary it, or you can use it as a hedge, and it's an absolute winner for using in the landscape. The giant kauri tree, the king of the forest. The native range for the kauri tree is the north of the North Island, where it's much warmer, and trees can live for an exceedingly long length of time. The largest kauri in New Zealand is called Tane Mahuta, which means Lord of the Forest. It's estimated to be in the region of 1500 to 2000 years old. At 150 feet in height and 45 feet in girth, it truly is a king of the forest. Perhaps surprising to many is that while Australia has many plants within the Protea family, New Zealand has only just 2. Here's one of them, Rewa, and it's found in the warmer zones throughout the North Island and the top of the South Island. And the second, Mihi, and is found in the northern half of the North Island. Ferns. As well as the iconic silver fern I showed earlier, there are so many others. They clothe the forest floor, they rise like giants, they cling to trees, cliffs and outcrops. New Zealand is home to 200 species of fern, 40% of which are found nowhere else in the world. They're endemic to New Zealand. From ground ferns like these two, houndstang fern and kio, 2 of my favourite ferns. Houndstang fern just clothes the forest floor, and then kio grows in a multitude of environments, but has these beautiful orangey bronze and sometimes red fronds. So going into the forest to some of the filmy ferns, the kidney fern, and then some more filmy ferns that really fill out when it rains and look hugely glossy and translucent. Beautiful ferns. From these, the forest floor dweller, the umbrella fern on the left, to one of the giants of the forest, one of the tree ferns. So moving out of the forest and into a much drier environment where these guys are seen. New Zealand has a number of native broom species, vastly different from the European broom, Cyathea scoparius. The weeping broom's a fabulous species, and it's native to those dry regions at the top of the South Island, where there are around 15 species of native broom in that location. New Zealand has 24 native brooms, and all are at risk due to habitat loss, competition from weeds and browsing. Here you can see a close-up of that weeping broom. Absolutely stunning, and most of our native brooms are scented, making them just fantastic in the home garden. Here's another broom, William's broom. It's a coastal plant found only in the North Island. As you can see, these 2 species don't have leaves. Rather, they have these flattened stems. They're unusual, but they're beautiful. Onto a fuchsia that's very different to most. And this is the smaller of the 2 species of fuchsia native to New Zealand. In fact, this is one of the smallest fuchsias in the world, the scrambling or climbing fuchsia. And here you can see the flowers and the really tiny small leaves. And in this image, the fruit, and the fruit are actually quite big. The fruit of the fuchsia are the larger red berries in this image. The smaller orange berries are of a Corokia, another small-leaved New Zealand shrub. And the fuchsia is scrambling through the Corokia. The other fuchsia, Fuchsia excoriticata, the second species, is a small deciduous tree, and it's actually the largest fuchsia in the world. It has peeling cinnamon-coloured bark, flowers that grow directly from the branches and trunk and leaves, and flowers with blue pollen. and is striking in any context. On to New Zealand spear grasses, and here we're going up further up into the subalpine and alpine parts of our mountainous regions to see these. There are about 40 species of speargrass, ranging in size from the diminutive to the absolutely enormous. They're actually in the same family as carrots, so you will see the similarity in the flowers, but that's about where the similarity to carrots ends. They are your worst nightmare when you're hiking, especially when the smaller species are hidden amongst the tussock grass. The tips of the speargrasses are razor sharp, and they can puncture through heavy jeans to your skin, and they'll draw blood from that small pinprick. While they're not poisonous per se, being pricked by one does sting for a short time. A far more polite speargrass and a lot easier to grow in cultivation is the soft speargrass. It's native to the 4th largest island of New Zealand after the South, the North and Stewart Islands. It's native to the Chatham Islands, and the Chatham Islands lie 500 miles east of the South Island. Also native to the Chatham Islands, this giant forget-me-not. Look at those fabulous large pleated leaves. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant. It's a coastal plant, and it's seen in its native habitat on rocky cliff faces and beaches. And while it's listed as vulnerable in its native habitat, it's commonly grown in cultivation. And look at those flowers. You can see how much of a classy plant it is to have in the home garden. Both of those large pleated leaves and these, the wonderful, wonderful blue forget-me-not flower. And this image is of a forget-me-not growing at Dunedin Botanic Garden one year, and it sported both blue and pink flowers on the same flower head, a very rare occurrence. Like the speargrass, Azorella pilaris is in the carrot family. It's just had a recent name change and is more commonly known as Stilbocarpa pilaris. It's native to Macquarie Island, which is one of the Australian territories, but it also is native to many of the other subantarctic islands, which are New Zealand territories. It's a really wonderful, wonderful plant. Staying on the coast, this pretty little scrambler is one of my favourites and is seen right around the New Zealand coast of all 3 main islands, the North Island, the South Island and Stewart Island. In cultivation, it is rare. It's seen here photographed at Dunedin Botanic Garden. Compared to the rest of the plant, the flowers are absolutely enormous. And I love it for these beautiful pastel pink flowers with the white stripes. And it's actually in the bindweed family, related to the weedy bindweed, or at least the one that we consider as weedy in New Zealand. Often we look to nature for design ideas, and these 2 plants, which grow cheek by jowl on the sand dunes, provide us a fabulous display to be inspired by. Pingao was once common along the New Zealand coast. However, threats such as the introduced marram grass have meant that only a few pockets remain. And the pingao you can see in the image are these golden, sort of golden browny orange stems that you can see. It's a really wonderful plant. The other plant, the bluey green one, is a euphorbia, a shore spurge. Euphorbia is a really striking spurge, and it forms really large patches of 3 feet high stems. Often the stem is red in colour, and you can see a red-stemmed euphorbia glauca on the left. It's a wonderful contrast with those blue-green leaves. In cultivation, both these plants can be easily grown in the New Zealand home garden and actually don't need sand. I mean, they're photographed here, the main image, on a sand dune. But you don't need sand, you just need any well-drained soil. and that will be perfect. However, the less fertile the soil, the better for the shore spurge, because it does have underground stems and can increase quite quickly to invasive proportions. I grow it in my home garden, and I'm constantly pulling it out, even from the pathway, the adjacent pathway. It's very easy to pull out, but because the soil is fertile, it just runs away on you. But I like it. It's beautiful and well worth growing in the home garden. A palm, New Zealand's only palm and the world's southernmost palm, the Nikau palm, seen here on the northwest coast of the South Island, growing with New Zealand flax, Phormium tenax. Standing sentinel above the canopy, it gives an almost tropical appearance to the landscape. It's seen in its native habitat through this western coast of the South Island, upwards through into the warmer areas at the top of the South Island and over the Cook Strait into the North Island. We'll go to the opposite habitat now from the coast. We'll go to the mountains. There are many, many mountain ranges in New Zealand. Many are inaccessible or only accessible by trekking. This one, Arthur's Pass, you can drive to as you go from the east coast to the west coast in the middle of the South Island. Small bodies of water called alpine tarns are commonplace in the mountains. You can see one here in the centre of the photo. The diversity of alpine species in these areas is just incredible. This large rock I want you to focus on, not the vegetation, because the large rock shows you the diversity of lichens that grow. Lichens are a strong indicator of low air pollution. And the air in Arthur's Pass is crisp, clear and clean, meaning lichens abound. Mountain daisies, they come in all sizes, from the diminutive to the large. And here's a large one. Look at that fabulous flower, that beautiful pure white daisy flower, but it's really the foliage that I love on this mountain daisy. And Mountain Nainai, it's the Dr. Seuss tree of New Zealand. It forms often dense patches along the ridges and is a real sight to behold. Arthur's Pass is one of my favourite places of New Zealand. I regularly visit during summer once the danger of avalanches and snow has passed and the mountain flowers are at their peak. It really is one of New Zealand's most accessible mountain alpine areas, and it's a garden of alpine flowers. So on to Veronica, or as it was previously known, Hebe. There are 80 species native to New Zealand, and they're perhaps one of the most showiest of the flora of New Zealand. Bees love them, as do gardeners. They come in all shapes and sizes, from this one, the glossy coastal-leaved Veronica speciosa, to the low-growing Veronica vernicosa, which grows on the forest floor of New Zealand beech forests, to one of the more unusual and unhebe-like whipcord species, Veronica cupressioides. The final group of plants I want to highlight are the Pittosporum genus. New Zealand has 25 species of Pittosporum. They're shrubs to small trees and are native to many, many environments, from this species that's native to the north of the North Island, and it's a coastal small tree. This one is a white flowered form, usually it has pink flowers. To the epiphytic, this is a Pittosporum that grows on other trees in its native range. And look at those beautiful flowers. I really love it. It's just a small shrub and it's just lovely to grow in the home garden. To Pittosporum anomalum. It's a divaricating shrub, and we talked about that before. You can see the branching at very, very wide angles, but look at those tiny, tiny leaves and that beautiful creamy white flower, a real stunner. To perhaps the most famous of the pittosporums in New Zealand, and it's only recently famous because many of the pittosporums are grown as hedges and you'll see them all around the country. This one is nicknamed Pit Pat. I don't know of any other New Zealand plant that has a nickname, and its native range is confined to the east coast of the South Island, where it's exceedingly rare. However, it's starting to become common in cultivation, and as with many of New Zealand's native plants, conservation programs are ongoing to help bring these species back from the brink of extinction. Many of the pittosporums have got scented flowers, and they're a real treat in the garden. Do you know, the best thing about New Zealand is that you just don't know what is around the next corner or on the other side of a misty covered bridge. The landscape changes are incredible, and the diversity of both landscapes and plants are an absolute dream for anyone interested in the natural world. Well, thank you for joining me today and allowing me to show you the amazing southern archipelago of New Zealand. I've really loved taking you there and showing you the plants and the landscapes of my home country. When it's safe, I hope you do go and visit New Zealand. I know it's 8,000 miles away, but it really is worth that trip. Until then, why not go to your local park, your public park or botanic garden when they're open and safe to go to, and just marvel at the plants that are there. You may not see New Zealand plants unless you're on the west coast of the US, but you'll see some pretty amazing plants, so be inspired by what you see there. Enjoy.